is to stand for just 1 minute silence. Thank you very much. Okay, we just carry out some initial business before we take ourselves into the question and answer. As ever, any members of the public would care to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly or take part in the meeting discussion using hashtag Assembly Police. And as ever, please turn your electronic devices to silent. Right, first of all, apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Eshalomi and Assembly Member Sahota substituting for her, and Assembly Member Hall is attending as an observer today. Okay, first of all, thank you. Welcome, Onka, and very much welcome, Susan, as an observer today. From tomorrow's full Assembly, you'll be appointed full part of the committee, and really look forward to working with you. Item 2 is declaration of interest. Can you kindly note the recommendations and, as ever, declare any other disclosable interests that are not there included? Happy with that? Thank you very much. As this is the first committee meeting of the new term, we've got some items in 3, 4 and 5 which are around memberships. Again, can we note the membership and chairing arrangements? And delighted to welcome Sean Berry as the Deputy Chair. So look forward to again working with Sean. So if you could please note the membership of the committee again. From tomorrow, Susan Hall will be a full part of the committee. Item 4 is the terms of reference, which are the present standing terms of reference for the committee. If colleagues are happy to do that, to agree those for the new session. Item 5 is the standing delegations of authority to the Chair. You can agree to those. Item 6 is the minutes of the last meeting on the 29th of March. Seems a long time ago. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the 29th of March? Item 7, summary list of actions. Again, can you note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings? Item 8, action under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action under delegated authority, namely to agree terms of reference and scope for the committee's first thematic meeting of this session on 5th of July, which will be a discussion with invited guests on antisocial behaviour. Are you happy with that? Right, good. Now let's get to the main part of the morning, which is our question and answer session. From previous conversations, we understand this is a busy time for police in London generally. Today is a busy day, so you'll be spared lunch, which is not necessarily a bad thing. However, we would like to get through our full set of questions. It's absolutely right at this important time that we have the opportunity to ask questions, but we will try to do so in a manner that gets you away at an appropriate time. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. So again, welcome very much this morning, Cressida Craig, who's a regular attendee. We thank you for that, and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden. So, first question I will kick off with, if I may, which is around protecting London from terrorism. So, direct to the Commissioner, if I may. Following the recent terror attacks, particularly the London Bridge attack, and indeed the very recent Finsbury Park attack, could you kindly provide us with an update on the Mayor's current counter-terror investigations, if you can?
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed, Chair. And can I start, first of all, by, of course, as we have acknowledged with our minute's silence, recognising the dreadful loss of life and the number of people whose lives have been turned upside down by the events in London and indeed in Manchester over the last several weeks. Secondly, I would also, of course, like to pay tribute to Craig. I think since you last met, I started, and I think the Deputy Commissioner, as he now is again, performed a fantastic role in the interim between Bernard and me, and indeed in his support to the Met and to Bernard for many, many years before. So huge thank you to Craig, and as you would know, I'm thoroughly enjoying working with him, and our ability to respond to the various incidents, of course, is in no small part to the very hard work that's gone on over many, many years before. Turning to the terrible events at London Bridge, as you know, a number of people were arrested. They have all subsequently been released. We do have a very large investigation that continues, and this might be a moment for me to pay tribute again, not just to officers but to members of the public who were so extraordinarily courageous on the night. You will be aware that we had many, many hundreds of officers there, and well over 1,000 in fact at the scene or in the immediate surrounds. Subsequently, as an example, the Counter-Terrorism Command for 7 days had 600 officers every day. But it's not just police officers, it's also members of our forensic staffs, for example, lots of police staff engaged in various different ways. It remains a very large investigation. We are, of course, working very closely with the coroner and to the coroner. And if I give you an example of scale, we have incurred to date overtime of about £1.2 million, and that will increase. I think we've seized 4,100 exhibits. You'll be aware that we carried out a large number of operations in the days afterwards. So that is what I might start by saying about Southwark. There may be follow-up questions, I understand. In relation to the terrible events just a couple of days ago in Finsbury Park, I do need to be careful, of course, because as you know, we have somebody in custody. There's a person who, a warrant of further detention has just been obtained, and he is in custody for section 41, which is of course a terrorist offence and includes murder and attempted murder. This incident was declared a terrorist incident 7 minutes after it happened. Very sadly, as you know, we have one person who is deceased, and we continue our investigation to establish exactly how he came to his death. We have carried out a special post-mortem, and we're working very, very closely with his family and indeed with all the people who were injured and their families. You'll be aware that between the first event and the second, we have, of course, had the Grenfell fire, and that is a further very significant major incident. As you know, we believe something like, but it won't be exactly this. At the moment, we say 79 people may have lost their life. 5 of those people have been identified, and we are carrying out an investigation which consists of us, the London Fire Brigade, and the expert independent buildings examiners. Again, we have very, very significant family liaison officer deployments to that incident. Everybody who we believe may be deceased, their families we are working with, and also very closely with 12 who've been in hospital, together with much support to the wider community. On that investigation, we currently have 260 officers dealing with the main investigation and the disaster victim identification. On the night, we deployed well over 150 into the scene, and every day we have a very large number on the cordons, over hundreds it started at a couple of hundred, it's come back down. So these 3 events, absolutely ghastly for London, very large scale. We are progressing large-scale investigations. We recognise entirely that in their different ways they have caused enormous concern to communities. We are doing our very level best to work closely with all our communities, with our local communities, to be engaging and speaking in every forum we can think of. And also we have a very big prerogative now to protect London going forward, and as well as normal business, if I might call it that, we have, as it's the summertime, we have lots of events. We've had the elections, we have the opening of Parliament today, and we have protests and demonstrations, and of course we're coming up to Eid. We are fully alert to all of this, and I will finish by simply saying it's been a whole Met response, supported by our communities and supported by many of you, all of you, and other politicians in other ways. We've been overwhelmed by public support, and people, I think, if anything, I would just describe the Met as steely in its determination and full of resolve. People want to do this work. They wish it hadn't happened, but if it has happened, they want to be there. And I can actually speak for the retired community as well, because they're all contacting us and saying, how can I help? I wish I was there. So there's a lot to do, but you have a fantastically capable police service, and we work incredibly closely, as you know, with the agencies and with the government.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's very reassuring, and you can be assured of the support of this committee in your work, and also agreeing with your sentiments at this difficult and busy time. You talked about it's a whole Met response. I'd be interested in your co-working with for example, the City of London and BTP as well,
Yes.
because it's part of the same footprint. Can you give us some feeling about how that's working at this time as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm conscious I'm here in support of the Deputy Mayor, but nevertheless,
Yes,
forgive me for not mentioning
No,
the BTP and the City of London Police, who have been absolutely integral to our ability to respond, and of course in relation to London Bridge in particular, but not just that. They have been absolutely up at the front end of the response, and in our gold control room set up at all stages. So in terms of first initial response, secondly, how do we now protect London? It's a totally integrated set of operations, and the Commissioner of the City and Chief Constable of BTP and I are speaking all the time. We're very content with our interoperability and our co-working, and of course you'll be well aware that sadly that the most seriously probably of the injured officers was indeed a BTP officer.
Indeed. There will be some questions later linked to resources and funding resources.
Of course.
That's coming along a little bit later, but I want to look and ask a question around investigative resources. Investigative resources, in essence, post-event, so detective doing the work after the event, the resource with these extreme events, your resources around that, the ability for that piece of work to be carried out. And then secondly, connected but separate, your resources around intelligence gathering in preventing events. So it's the post and prior piece, both around resources, both, I would suggest, heavily under pressure at the moment by the nature of events. Could you comment around your satisfaction or confidence that you have resources in both those separate spheres?
You, as a committee, I know you're very well aware that the Met flexes and surges all day long tactically, and indeed every week, every month, every year we change shape a bit, and are very, very capable at doing that. And we're very capable at knowing, where our people are, what their skills are, what the priorities are, and where we're going to put people. And we work incredibly closely, of course, with the National Police Counter-Terrorism Network. And this set of events, in terms of our processes, if you like, is being dealt with in a similar way. However, of course, they are very large scale, and I've given you some idea. I can do more on that if you like, but I can give you some idea of the scale. These are very large scale responses for us. And we have done this against the background, as you know, of some rising demand, both in terms of our emergency calls, crime more generally, knife crime in particular, and indeed in the last 2 months, a higher than was the average over last year level of homicide for a start. So we have to look very, very hard at who is doing what and what effort of our most skilled investigators we are putting into which aspect of which case. And I mentioned, for example, that the Grenfell fire is taking 260, in essence, detectives. And that's needed. It won't be like that forever, but it will be there for a long time, and that is a big demand. The counter-terrorist network is certainly stretched. Before 12 weeks ago, they had a set of people, and they still have that set of people across the country, in essence. And they've now had 4 major attacks to deal with, and also disrupted a number, I think 5 other plots. Those all take, as you say, a great deal of backward-looking investigative resource. And it takes potentially away from some of the proactive and forward-looking intelligence work. We have supplemented the National Counter-Terrorism Network from some of our crime resources, nationally and in London, and we need to do that. And we are shifting resources across our different resources and people across the Met. This does have an impact on other, for example, investigations. We've had to pause some, we've had to slow down on some, and that's just a necessity.
I guess, as you said, the Met has already been malleable to the degree that it moves where the demand is within its capacity.
Yes.
But I guess the worry here that concerns us is that there becomes a tipping point where, because of the pressures, you don't have that capacity to move and to cover as well as you can, and with these level of events that might be an issue. The other part of the question, which you have touched upon, is the preventative piece, yes, which is about information that the public are giving, which is not just to Met, it's also to MI6. One of my colleagues, I think Andrew Boff, asked the question that we asked the question, was around recent attacks. There has been anecdotal evidence of information given previously. We won't go into detail and name names, but there was concern raised in this chamber about the capacity and the ability for the services, shall we say, to absorb and act upon information given to them by the public. Would you, in context of what you just said, would you like to comment on that strain and test?
I would continue to say to the public, please contact us if you have any concerns at all. Be vigilant. If you see something that worries you, if you see somebody's behaviour changing, if you are concerned about an individual or an event, you must tell us. We do respond and will continue so to do to every single, for example, call to the counter-terrorist hotline. And those are thoroughly investigated and dealt with. We can't always tell the person what happened, and sometimes we won't, of course, it won't result in, for example, somebody being arrested, because it will fit into a wider picture of intelligence. It is also the case that the government have made it clear that there is going to be a good, long, hard look at the whole terrorist strategy. We're working really closely with the government, and we are looking forward to what comes out of that. And we are also, because of the various attacks, we will be working with the agencies to ensure that we can give a good account of what was known and what wasn't known and what happened to, for example, the Intelligence Security Committee and to a coroner's inquest or to other judicial inquiries. And I know I can say that both the Police Counter-Terrorism Network and MI5 are looking at our machinery, if I can put it that way, to ensure that we have the best possible ability in our technology, in our analysis, and in our risk-based decision-making to try to deal with all this information in the most effective way. But as my colleague Mark Rowley has said on more than one occasion, when you are dealing, as we have been some of the time recently, with people who may be lone actors, people who are quite alone people, to know when something has changed in their head so that they are now prepared, not just expressing views that you and I would say were absolutely vile, but actually they are now going to do something violent, murderous, and they are going to be happy to be killed. It's often very hard to know that.
I understand that. It's that speed of movement from when it's just a thought in an individual's mind for that person to take action. My last question before we move on to the next set, it may be that Craig might want to comment on it, which was the tactic used across the way about run, hide and tell that was operated very much on the night of the London Bridge attacks. Craig, do you want to comment, or anybody comment on the effectiveness of that and how that...
By all means, it's a tactic, it's a decision made very, very quickly. So on that night, it was done quite quickly in the control room in terms of doing that. And it is around the safety of the public. We've done a lot of work on this over the last number of years, and I know a number of members have seen some of the exercises around these sorts of attacks that we've done and run through. And it really is taking the learning from that to say, what is the most effective thing people can do? And I think you saw some really good examples of that, some of it out on social media, of people putting out stuff very, very quickly about what was going on. And with all the attacks we've seen over the last couple of months, we've seen that advantage of the presence in social media very quickly, the ability to get messages out, and also to get information back from the public. The public, as the Commissioner's covered, are just incredibly willing to be involved, be part of it and try and help. And that's a real strength from these events.
Deputy Mayor, just briefly, were you cited on this tactic? This was something that you support and the way that was carried out? That particular tactic?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of the plans and the operational emergency planning, absolutely we're cited on that. But on the night, these are operational decisions taken and rightly at that stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Next set of questions.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Mayor, can I ask you about the report by Lord Harris that was published last year in October, and we were told that there was a formal response to the report and its recommendations. Why has the response not yet been published?
You're right. You're right. The Harris Review was published last October, and in terms of getting on with implementing the recommendations of the report, we have absolutely been getting on with that. About a third of the recommendations have been taken on board and have been implemented. In terms of publishing the recommendations, we were on track to publish one, and then the general election was called. And since then, I'm sure you'll understand, we have been really focused on the implementation of the recommendations. And we will publish we're looking to publish an annual report in October around what we will, how far the recommendations of the Harris report have been taken. Of course, you'll know also there were many recommendations, and the majority of which were actually focused on other organisations as well as the government. And we have been actively pursuing those and making sure that they are taken on board.
So can I just get this right? So there'll be an annual report coming out in October, did you say?
We hope to publish an annual report in October. We were on track to publish an interim report on how far we'd got, but the general election was called. We have been focusing on implementing the recommendations, and as I'm sure you'll understand, that is continues to be our focus. We have activated a third of those recommendations. The majority of the recommendations were not for City Hall, but for other organisations, including the government, and we are actively pursuing those as well.
Can I just move on? Lord Harris also said something about MOPEC. I mean, can you explain to us the structure of MOPEC in terms of who's got responsibility for issues related to counter-terrorism as things stand at present?
Well, I chair the contest board, which brings together the agencies and looking at our response and our position in terms of counter-terrorism with prevent and protect and those elements. So ultimately, in terms of that, that will be me. I chair the contest board. And I get advice from the Chief Executive. We have a lot of expertise within MOPAC on counter-terrorism and on the relationship between counter-terrorism and the whole system of policing, because of course counter-terrorism is not just about the counter-terrorism capacity and capability of the Metropolitan Police, but also about the system, including neighbourhood policing, and how that you've asked previously about intelligence gathering, how that intelligence can come from the communities into the police and into counter-terrorism as well.
I mean, Lord Harris was very specific that he felt the dedicated counter-terrorism advice to the mayor and MOPAC outside the police is lacking, and one of his recommendations was for an advisor on counter-terrorism to be appointed to sit within MOPAC. What do you make of that?
In terms of that specific recommendation, we're still looking at that. We have extremely good expert advice on counter-terrorism, not just within MOPAC, but also from regular briefings from Mark Rowley, the head of the counter-terrorism command in the Metropolitan Police. And we are looking at that, and if we feel that that would add value to the structures and expertise and advice that comes in, we will take that forward.
Okay. Peter, I think you're coming on to your question now, I believe.
Oh, right, yes. Good morning, Commissioner. Congratulations, by the way, on your appointment. Can you tell me, with the state of the threat, what kind of difference this is going to make to large-scale events in London? I mean, you know, we've just had one. I went to one to watch the Tipping Colour, for example, on Saturday. But we've obviously got things like the Notting Hill Carnival coming up imminently. What are the particular changes that we will see as a result of the new and intensified threat?
We have a delicate balance, I think, to draw here. On the one hand, those of us who've lived and worked in this city all our lives, pretty much, are very, very proud and hold very dear the fact that it is extraordinarily resilient, and we carry on, and we do not give in to terrorists who want to get us to change our way of life. And after the London Bridge attack, as you know, on the Monday morning, London Bridge Station was open and visitors were flooding through London and people working likewise, and we were keeping them safe. And there were some visible changes, for example, the protection on the bridges that came in following 2 days. The Queen's birthday parade that you mentioned went ahead, the elections went ahead, the Cricket World Cup went ahead. I could go on. Everything carried on, and the vast majority of them, I think, were enjoyed in exactly the same way as they always have been, with relatively little extra disruption to people. But there was some extra disruption and a change in some ways to the look and feel. So, for example, on the Queen's birthday parade down the Mall, for this year, for the first time, and I don't say it will always be like this, but for the first time, the officers who are looking at the crowd were all dressed in their full protective equipment, with their batons and tasers and batons and CS. And in the previous years, they've been in their tunics and their white gloves. This was obviously a decision by Gold, entirely hers to make, based on her understanding of the potential threat and what they might be called upon to do. So there are some changes, and you can see signs of increased armed patrolling, increased officer patrolling, in some places different search regimes, and we do that on a case-by-case, event-by-event, dynamic. What is the current threat? What is the intelligence? What do we think? Now, clearly we're all thinking about our big events in London where we have large gatherings of crowds, and one of those is Notting Hill, and I'm working very closely with the Deputy Mayor and also with the Mayor on our preparations for the Carnival. But we have a CT security advisor who is working pretty much full-time on how we secure Carnival. and what measures need to be put in place. We put some in place last year, which were different and very specifically counter-terrorist measures, and there may well be others this year.
Well, that's very reassuring to know. Obviously, the public as well would probably quite like to see some reassuring signs of increased presence or whatever. But what I was thinking is in terms of, perhaps I could ask you, Deputy Mayor, as well, in terms of these big events like Notting Hill particularly coming up, or also the birthday parade, people are sort of coming, aren't they, at the event from all sorts of different, they're coming from everywhere. There is no entry point, as it were. So when I went there on Saturday, I mean, I was with a friend who had a big bag. At no point was it obviously searched or whatever. And you might say, well, how could it be? But would there be some sort of form of way in which there could be formal entries to these things so that people would actually have to go through, if you like, a police entrance, even to big formal, in public events such as this? Is that a possibility?
So I can tell you that there are some public events that we've already gone from no searching to searching.
Right.
And that's certainly something we will consider and do. And in fact, we didn't actually in our introduction mention the move to critical after the Manchester attack, which of course did change the look and feel rather a lot in London, because we had, for a very short period of time, soldiers on replacing some of our armed officers, and the public could see them. Now, throughout London at that point, institutions, no doubt including this one, were, if I can call it an institution, were putting in place extra measures. Yeah. And they were out the front here, and regimes were tightened up. What I am saying is that's a possibility, but it has to be, we have to look at the current threat, the current intelligence, what will keep people safe, and whether that is a practical, whichever thing we're thinking of, is it a practical tactic in these circumstances? But absolutely, searching is one thing we often put in place and will do in the future.
Can I just ask one more question, actually, which is might sound a silly question, but given the nature of the particular terrorism at the moment, is it true to say that actually public events, big public events, such as we're talking about, are on pretty much a par with almost any other public situation? Are they particularly targeted by these terrorists? I would have thought not. It tends to be quite random.
Well, in the past, certainly, some large public events, not in other countries, have very clearly been targeted. And what we do know is that a large public event, by definition, usually provides a large crowd. And even for the type of threat that you're talking about, and of course we do actually have a multiplicity of threats. We're very focused at the moment on what has happened in the last few weeks, of course, and the people that we know about who have caused those attacks. But 12 weeks ago, the counter-terrorist network was already working at a very high state of alert and looking at a wide range of threats. So we need to look at the current picture all the time, but not forget some of the threats that perhaps people would have been thinking about a few months ago. They have not gone away, and we need to protect against all of them. But in essence, a large public event is a large crowd, and it does appear, these ghastly things we've seen in the last few weeks, that a crowd is potentially vulnerable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Before we go to the next question, I think over the summer the committee will be seeking, probably one for you, Craig, some private briefings around in anticipation of Notting Hill, and I think that's something we can arrange to give reassurance. Sorry, Caroline.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the police for everything you're doing, and I know I went to Finsbury Park last night and met the community, and they were grateful for what you did on the night, but also your response since. What I want to understand is you've said, Commissioner, that we're dealing with people who appear very volatile and unstable. They're using low-tech methods. Going forward, what implications do you think this sort of changing nature of terror has for how the police and other services work to prevent extremism?
mentioned the review that the government have announced, and a very large focus of that, I think, will be on prevention. I don't mean preventing the attack, I mean preventing people becoming violent extremists, and intercepting them as they're beginning to think about actually serious violence. The key to this for me is absolutely within our communities, and the Deputy Mayor's already mentioned the sort of the wider part of policing that plays such a role in countering terrorism. I know Craig has said this before, but it bears repetition. After an attack, at least half, usually 2/3 of the people that are deployed to deal with it are not from the counter-terrorism network. They're from general policing. And I would say the same actually about the preventative work. It's very hard to measure, it's very hard to put a finger on, but the vital importance of what our neighbourhood officers and our links with the communities provide, we need to build on. And we need to get messaging out to communities, and we're seeing in many communities, people being absolutely outraged and standing up and condemning in a way perhaps they might not have felt able to do in the past. We're seeing people calling the hotline more and more. We're getting more information from our communities. We need to work harder and harder at that. And I don't want to start a great debate here. I know the PREVENT programme itself is quite controversial in many respects. However, it has had some fantastic successes with some individuals, not least right-wing extremists. I think something like 30% of channel referrals are domestic extremism referrals, which is something I don't think people in our wider communities always know about or hear. So they've had some great successes, and for me the big work has to go on in our communities. There's then some stuff around, for example, we constantly put out advice around things like the precursors that people might have used for creating an IED, how we regulate that, how we get people to give us information if somebody does something odd there. We're thinking at the moment, how can you? It's very hard, but how can you actually deal with van hire? Obviously we sent a message to the hire community to say, please be careful, think who it is, think, if there's anything suspicious, let us know. But should that be regulated in any further way? So there's a whole big review to be done. Might require some legislation, I don't know. Might require some tweaking of legislation, but for me it's in the communities.
Thank you for that. And I think reviewing the PREVENT bit is really important. We did some work a year or two ago on this committee, which you might want to revisit, because I think there was some recommendation there that may feed in to that review. You mentioned, and the Chair touched on earlier, the anti-terrorism hotline. I understand that more than twice the number of calls we've had in the previous 12 months, 22,000 people making contact. But, questions have been raised about how that information is used. You said that that they respond to every call to the hotline. That sort of volume, are you really able to do that?
Well, we absolutely log every call, keep a record of every call, assess every call, and take action. Now, clearly, as I said, we can't always tell people what that action was. Sometimes it will be, I don't want to discourage anybody at all, but sometimes it is actually repeat information, or even sometimes sort of information that as soon as we look at it, we realise is completely misguided, or the person who rang us has, got in a complete muddle. But that's rare, and basically, yes, we do deal with that, with all of them, and we do that at the time. Sometimes it's that vital information which is actually going to influence today's operation, so we must do that.
Okay, but what about the allegations that in the recent incidents, members of the public say that they made contact about recent attackers and it wasn't used?
There will, of course, be thorough reviews of what has happened, but my information at the moment is that actually the calls that were made were, as far as we can possibly tell, logged properly, assessed properly, and dealt with properly. But I probably shouldn't say any more than that at this stage. There will be further reviews of everything, I'm sure.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Can we turn to the world of encryption and social media and the police's view on that and the stances it may take, whether it's ACPO or whether it's a Met view? I think I've asked you, Craig, before. So just remind us, what is the police stance around the debate of the use of social media in radicalisation, moving from passive support to I'm prepared to take an act of violence. So our views have changed over the years. So what would the police be asking of government? Is there an official line?
Well, you'll be aware it's back on as a very current debate again at the moment about where it should be. And when we talked about this before, I think we spoke about some of those issues where with companies and with organisations getting that right balance between the freedoms that we expect as a society, but also those powers and regulatory framework we need as a police service to do and carry out investigations. There are challenges for us with that increasing level of encryption and modern technology. It's part of the work we've talked about before about making sure we're in the right position to be able to tackle those issues. One, we have the technological capability. Two, we have a legal framework that allows us to do them. And actually, it's technologically capable of being able to do it, because with some of this encryption, it's not. So that's the bit that we're working on at the moment to develop that position. And we spoke before around the challenge with working with some of the companies that have worldwide footprints and our ability to influence from within the UK. I think the debate is moving. Would be my sense from everything we're picking up that debate is moving with organisations. And you know, if you only look at some of the stuff that's being reported quite recently about how some of the technology companies are responding and recognising those issues. You know, I think there's out of some of these terrible events may come some real opportunities to say we need a different debate about how we work in that space.
But is it going to happen fast enough in the sense that if you're in crisis and you're fighting a ever-changing, moving challenges around counter-terrorism and some of those issues, is there not the need for speed issues? And let's separate out the issues of the role of social media and there's an element of right of free speech, but we know that individuals, particularly those lone wolves, if we can call them that, those who have got access to those bits, never mind the dark webs, on the mainstream issue, social media, about how to either something that will radicalise them or how to make weapons that can hurt and wound and cause destruction. So where are we on? Take us through the social media bit. How quickly do you think we could move in terms of the incidents we've had to a sensible response from those operators of those sites in terms of dealing with those aspects, if there is an official representation that this is not right, this should be dealt with and this should be taken down?
I don't have that data with me. We've previously discussed and shared with you before. So to reassure, we actually do that at the moment. So there are teams of people, when stuff is reported to us, and I'll quite have to share it with you in writing afterwards, the number of sites we take down and other parts of the organisation take down when they see stuff. I think that debate has moved, and I think some of the big social media companies certainly in the last month, have started to talk much more about how quickly they will take these things down as they're identified. But I think there are two distinct parts to the question that you identify. I think there's the issue of communication in social media between people, and there's the issue of what I would call promoting videos, sort of how-to books, cookbooks, those sorts of things. So I think we've got an awful lot of work going on about how we take that down. I think the communication bit is the next challenge. And I think as part of the review the Commissioner talked about, part of the work that will go on across UK government is how do we properly operate in that space? What's the legal framework? And also, what are the levers? Because with some of this technology, it is very, very difficult to get into that communication bit. I think the cookbook bit and those sorts of things, And I just encourage people, you know, if you're on a social media site and you see stuff on there that's wrong, they've all now got a report button, and things do happen. We spoke before with some of the work we'd done around we called it a Digital 101 pilot, where when we stepped into the social media space, almost having your virtual police officer on that street, moderated behaviour, you'll see us increasingly doing that as part of the prevention work and tackling this. I think we'll come up against some legal challenges with some of these global companies, but I think if there's an opportunity, now is the time to do it.
Okay, if we can go back to the issue of the communication then, and between individuals or groups that want to cause harm to us. So in that sense, will we be seeing, or is this going on, lobbying and representation to government about what powers the police may need, maybe the intelligence services, maybe it's at one, to make us more safer?
We do, and we talk all the time about those powers. Okay. And those. You'll be aware with some of the recent bills that came through under the last Parliament, there was a very big debate around how far can you go, what can you go, but then there's also that bit at the end that's quite frustrating. You might want to go to there, but is it technically, do we have the technical capability to be able to do that? So, no, that is a very, very live debate, and we have people both in the CT world and elsewhere who literally, nationally, all the time are saying this is what's happening and this is what's going. Because I say the other bit with that is that technology is moving far faster than legal frameworks. So you've heard us talk in the past about the challenge of, we use the phrase going dark, where there are bits of information and intelligence that you literally can't access. That will be increasingly a challenge. Technology moves faster than the legal framework in which we operate.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're going to move away for the moment from the specific subject around terrorism, though clearly the committee will be here to scrutinise and support you as we continue. Now we're moving to priorities for you, Cressida, as a new commissioner. I think, Len, you're leading on some questions around that.
Okay, back to me then. Commissioner, can you set out your vision and priorities for the Met under your tenure?
Yes, I've come in as Commissioner, which I would say is the best job in the world. I'm incredibly privileged to be doing it, and I am taking on an organisation which faces challenges, of course, on a number of different fronts, but I think has shown over the last few weeks incredible people, incredible professionalism, incredible, wonderful values, and a very powerful history of learning and learning and learning from what has gone on. I do believe, as I said, this is the greatest global city, and I think it is served by the best police service in the world. It's not perfect, and there are many things we need to improve and indeed to change. But my three priorities are, firstly, I would put on the first category under the banner of public confidence. Public confidence is very high in the police. Support from the public is generally very high, and even more so after the last few weeks, as I've said. But I am conscious that we have some parts of some of our communities that have lower confidence, and I want to reduce that gap, particularly some of our minority ethnic and most deprived communities. And secondly, amongst some of our young people, I want to improve the competence of young people in their police service. Within public confidence, of course, are the operational priorities. And for me, this is primarily about violence. We have, obviously, the police and crime plan, and we're working to that. But within that, I think terrorism, obviously, and it's become into even sharper focus in the last few weeks. Knife and gun crime, but in particular knife crime, is a very big challenge for us at the moment that I simply think is too high and I want to bear down on. And violence against women and girls, if I could put it that way, and vulnerable people more broadly. In all cases, it's about reducing the the crime, the threat, and terrorism is a crime, of course. And secondly, trying to support people who become victims as best we possibly can as the police. We only have a partial role in that, but to give them as good a service as we can, and of course bring people to justice wherever we can. I want to move us towards prevention and to get, as they say, upstream as far as possible. And a lot of the work we're doing around, for example, vulnerable people and their and victimisation is about trying to get upstream. So that's my first category. My second category is about my people, our people in the Met. I want them to feel that they're as well led, as well equipped, as well supported as they can be, that they have discretion, that they have the agency, that they can take their assessment of risk and get on and make decisions, and when they've done that in good faith, that they feel supported. And thirdly, we need to transform for the future. We have some financial challenges, but we also have a requirement to transform in a variety of different ways, not least to become a 21st century police service making the best of technology and data, and we've got a lot going on that at the moment, as you know. When I spoke to my management board when I started, and to several other people, I have said consistently, events aside, this 5 years, which I hope it will be defined by our ability to create the Met of the future, to transform. Of course, we've got a lot of events, ghastly events, and a changing understanding of the terrorist threat. But I still stand by. We must push forward with our changing for the future, our transformation programme, and we have to do that obviously within our financial envelope, whatever that ends up being.
On your tour of the boroughs, and I know that you've done many, and I was there when your first one at Lewisham, what do you think has been the central theme that's come back from the workforce about the job? What do you think that is there a central message that's come back, or a number of messages that have not shocked you, but said, that's interesting, I never thought of it like that, or I did think of it, but not in those terms?
So on the one hand, I shouldn't be surprised, but there is incredible pride in what they do and what we do, in what their colleagues have done, and not least, the amazing courage and professionalism in the face of events, and the ability of the Met to just get on with it. So pride, I think, is strong. I think I was, if I'm honest, I was quite surprised, having been a candidate and talked to people, I was quite surprised on the other side of the equation by the enormous sense of demand that officers have, particularly in relation to emergency response and sort of handling calls, and you'll be aware that's gone up 30%, I think, in the last 2 years. So that's a very big stretch for them. But also, I think, it is just such a professional service compared with 15 years ago, or when I joined 30-something years ago. But the expectations across the board of high-quality performance are very high and bear down on people when they're managing a multiplicity of demands and risk, and they feel that they've got to reach this sort of platinum standard, otherwise they're going potentially to be kind of investigated or dealt with in some way. That is pushing a lot of pressure on them, I think, and I am concerned about that. But finally, I would just say they are just so keen to, despite the fact this is a busy city and there's always a lot going on, they're just so keen to continue having a genuinely highly effective relationship with their public. Okay. And they want us to do that. In terms of what the police exist for, that response, that emergency, that's what you do, and you do it really well. As an organisation that has to transform and change, do you think it's a listening organisation? In what sense? Sorry.
Managers listening to managers and managers listening to various levels. And we can talk about leadership at various levels if you want.
Sure.
You know, in terms of circumstances, I think everyone has sometimes that where the boss doesn't listen, even probably at senior level, in terms of conversations with each other. But
Into that already, aren't we?
He used to be my boss, so we're used to it.
You know, some of the mixed messages over the years that we've had about the Met on some of the issues and some of that communication problems, or when we're introducing change, that do we really pick up? Is the imperative to make the change happen?
Sure.
Because regardless, that we say we're going to make this change, and when we never come off because the evidence suggests, or we come off a number of years later, you know, we actually reverse the trend that we were moving into.
I think there are a number of things happening here. Firstly, it is a very busy organisation, and it tends to, you know, people admire its ability to do everything it does, as you say, and to respond and to change on a sort of in a kind of tactical way to what's happening now, or what our biggest challenge right now. And it's a very operational organisation, that's for sure. And getting people really excited about the changes for the future when they're actually, you know, slogging away dealing with today's multiplicity of calls is quite hard, potentially anyway. And secondly, I don't make any criticism of you know, where we've been or where we are, but in my second thing about my people, I want them to be as well led as possible. I do want us to be really, really, really listening. I do want people to feel that they can challenge a lot more. I do want to get away from a lot of the hierarchy. I can't just flip my fingers and say, right, no more hierarchy. But I want officers and staff to feel that they can influence not just how they do their job today, but actually the future. It's a big beast, 40,000 plus people. But I think we can improve the listening, and we can improve communication in all directions. And we can flatten the hierarchies quite a lot, so that more people feel more engaged with the change programmes and where we're going for the future. And that, you know, that starts at the top. We need to get out there and be listening, and we need to be coherent and consistent in our understanding of what's required in some quite uncertain times.
Okay, and one of the key issues around that, dealing with the job, if we can say, is maximising the use of the resources you've got. And the Met's taken some steps of trying to push that to whatever the front line means in terms of tackling policing. I have an interpretation sitting behind a desk is the front line tackling policing as much as being out on the streets, and we shouldn't forget that. As much as that warranted police officers are important, but the support that you get in delivering your job is equally important and is an effective tool in tackling crime. So in that sense, around maximising those resources and flexing those issues, one of the issues, and we, can I just say on behalf of the committee, I think the chair would say this, we welcome two issues. One, the issue about the emphasis on tackling violence. We've raised it for a number of years in terms of that trend, and also about the preventative issues, because some parts of the Met have got time and the resources to do some of that preventative work. The pressure's on, I accept. Territorial policing, increasingly, if you know, talking to people on the ground, say we don't have much time to do some of that longer term problem solving because we've lost some of that capacity, and preventative work is becoming increasingly difficult. So in that times, is there any discussion going on at senior level to start thinking that through? And my colleague will raise issues about borough mergers, about what can we do in terms of particularly around territorial policing of getting that prevent bit right in terms of some of that problem solving and interventions that stop harm to people.
Short answer, absolutely there is. In fact, just yesterday, we as a top team spent quite a lot of time on, as a whole top team, talking about this subject. I think within territorial policing, there is A, a lot of pressure, but B, also some of the proposed movements towards, for example, bringing all our work to protect and support and deal with crimes against vulnerable people together. That's highly preventative. That's about trying to make sure that You don't have somebody being dealt with by 10 different police officers and 4 different agencies. We bring it together in a one-stop sort of approach, and we look at really seriously at, for example, repeat victimisation. So there are areas where we are already shifting quite strongly towards, I think, a preventative approach. We're also working very hard to try to take demand of all sorts out of the system, whether that's in-call handling, by more online or so forth, and I think we will need to do more of that, and we'll need to be quite bold about some of that. But I do recognise that if you go out on patrol with a response officer now, they will say, I don't get as much time for proactivity as I once did. However, if you speak to a dedicated ward officer, for example, even in our, or more particularly in our Pathfinder sites, you know, they are saying, yeah, actually, I've got time to really solve some problems here, and I'm really enjoying that. So it's not easy, but that's the way we want to go. It's particularly not easy, given the first conversation about just the sheer scale of response to events. But that's where we want to get to.
Okay, let's move on to then sort of issues around notifiable offences. They've started to rise. Some of the trends are there. What do you think is driving some of the change? If we could concentrate on violence, which I think this committee would probably welcome, what do you think is driving some of that trend in the rises? What's the thinking?
It's quite hard to know. We're not out of step with the rest of the country, as you'll be aware. In fact, if anything, the rise in London is rather lower than the rest of the country. Does appear to be, over the last financial year and into this, definitely a rise, and in particularly in some categories. We have, as an example, very high profile and really of concern, the huge rise in theft of mopeds and snatches and sometimes robberies, violence of people to buy somebody sitting on a moped in a number of different boroughs. That is a huge issue for us at the moment, and I would describe that as almost it's a kind of trend. I mean, it's a trend in both senses of the word. It's something that is primarily young men who appear to get a big thrill out of doing it, who are seeing it as an easy source of income, who find it too easy to steal the mopeds. I could go on. It's a kind of, it's not very different from, you all remember, Len, you and I go back a very long way, the theft of cash boxes 10 years ago. We designed it out. We need to design that out. And, of course, do a lot more intelligence work and, lots of work with the criminal justice system and diversion and whatnot. But, we are bearing down on that, and we need to. But why has it suddenly exploded? Well, I think because some people started doing it and it turned out to be easier than they thought, probably. Knife crime is a very dispersed problem. This isn't about gangs primarily, although there are knives used in gangs, of course, and we're working very hard against our most prolific knife carriers, most of whom are in some kind of gang, some sort of semi-organised setup. But we've also got a lot of other young people carrying knives, some of whom, of course, are saying they're carrying it because they don't feel very well protected. We completely get that. We may come on to that as a separate issue. But I don't think, unless Craig's going to help me, I don't think we can put our finger on something. What we can say is that nationally, crime was going down, seems to be going back up.
Okay. And just my last question, really. Do you think it's time, we talk about the violence, we've got the Mayor's strategy, which I welcome because it's the first time we've had a policing strategy that mentioned that. I can go back to policing strategies where we never even mentioned drugs in the past and its impact on crime. And I don't think for a long time we've talked about the role of alcohol, except we know there are drivers of that. Is it time that we dust down and re-look at some of our activities around issues of that drug market that maybe, not all, leading to some of these knife crime activities, of deals that have gone wrong, issues that have gone quite, in terms of not gone quite right, and or also looking at the role of alcohol in terms of, not that I'm going to stop everyone having a drink, but there is a propensity in certain violent crimes that drives those, thinking of domestic violence, but not in all. I can't think, and these are not excuses for that crime, but they are a factor in it in some ways. And somehow, in times of reduced resources, how does the Met actually start to hit some of these levers to try and put a pause on the trend or send some signals around some of those activities?
So, before hand over to the Commissioner in terms of some of the operational responses, that's exactly what we're looking at in terms of the knife crime strategy, but also in terms of the policing crime plan, around what is it that we need to do in terms of prevention and intervention, and how far down the line you can get to try to make sure that these problems don't, you're not just dealing with the symptoms, which is what the police are actually having to do at the moment in tackling it and bearing down on violence. So we are looking at what does that mean in terms of drugs, what does it mean in terms of alcohol, but also what does it mean in terms of mental health issues and the trauma and the issues that we really need to get to understand about what's driving people to be violent. Because unless we get to the drivers of of that violence, we're always going to be tackling the symptoms. It is hard. It's hard to find the space. Policing can't do it on its own. It really can't do it on its own. It has a particular role, and there is the preventative aspect of policing, and there is a role for the police to play in that, but everybody else has to play their role, and that's what we're doing from the Mayor's office in convening and driving partnership working around that with local authorities, with the NHS, and with the criminal justice system as well, to make sure that not only is that, when there has been an arrest, that the right sentencing gets put in place, but also that there's the right mechanisms to try to tackle reoffending, because you absolutely have to deal with the drivers once people have committed the offence as well, around how do you help them not commit another offence, because that's really how you're going to tackle repeat victimisation. You have to also tackle the offenders as well.
So, do you want to add anything in terms of what the police need to do to implement that community safety plan around alcohol or drugs issues? And, because you could say it's more of the same, but actually we might need something a little bit different. Or a slightly different emphasis. I mean, one of the issues, and I would say, thank you to Sophie Linda, because I know what she's doing behind the scenes, the mixed messages of a cultural strategy that says we want a vibrant nighttime economy, which I agree with, but actually that doesn't mean we go soft on poor landlords, irresponsible club owners who think drugs is all right to go around willy-nilly, and it doesn't really matter if people hurt themselves because it's up to them, they're responsible people, or people that keep feeding people drink knowing full well that they've had enough and they should be turned away before trouble begins. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's in the home or on the way home, around some of those issues. And it's those issues that I'm looking for the police. So whether it's a revamped licensing effort, because there's all sorts of good stories around licensing from the police, but there's also some horror stories. There isn't a consistency across London about the police's enforcement role on licensing that needs to be brought in. And it might well be about experience, it may well be about that, but it seems to me if that's about your prevent strategy, that's what it should be about. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for.
I entirely take those points, Len. What we are finding with the violent crime problems, let's take knife crime as an example. I said it's very dispersed. It's very different in different boroughs, different places, different sub-areas really. But absolutely, a lot of it comes back to drugs markets, and in some parts, absolutely, a lot of it is alcohol-fueled. All of the boroughs, as you know, have their local priorities as well as the the most significant priorities. All of them are looking very hard at how they do their thing in relation to these. But at the same time, we need to have a consistent approach across some of these issues. And I'm not going to say you're wrong, because I'm sure you're right. But we need to be more consistent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree completely. There's often a tension around encouraging the nighttime economy, which is the Night Tsar's mission for London, but also the tension again keeping those evenings safe for Londoners. And I think that's something we need to be very conscious of. Now, before we go into the next set of questions, which is particularly around preventing serious violence, you touched upon earlier your aspirations for your workforce, Commissioner, and I think we already had a question that I think Uncle would like to pursue a little bit further, your thoughts around the workforce.
Yes, Commissioner, I just want to concentrate on the workforce. First of all, let me on record put my gratitude for all the hard work which the Metropolitan Police have done over recent months. In 2016, 62% of the uniformed officers in the Met were set their morale was low, 62%. That puts you lower than 38 of the other 42 workforces. And then you rightly said that morale was very low and you wanted to work on the morale. What particular measures and do you have that you want to put in for making a better working environment for officers and to lift the morale up?
So there's a multiplicity of things. I don't want to trivialise this, but I have been a police officer for an incredibly long time, one of the longest in the Met. And in some respects, it has always been the case that if you ask the police officer, you know, how's things, they say, oh, it used to be a lot better and it's not great, or a ruder version of that. So I do kind of take that slightly into account. However, there are some things which have happened which have affected police officers in particular, which has affected their morale, about which I can probably do relatively little right now. So, London is a very expensive place to be, and there are issues around pay for some individuals, some cohorts in particular, and pensions, as you'll be aware, which actually still kind of rankle with people that they feel that the job they joined and the contract they felt they had is not now the one that they are working to. They will have to, as with other parts of the public sector, they'll have to work longer, and their pension arrangements are not what they once were. So there are some things there that I do recognise will be extremely hard for me to, you know, can't wave a magic wand. However, I do think we have great people. I think we have fantastic people coming through the door, incredibly capable and diverse, and really, really super recruitment. We still have very high retention, and you know, the job gets done to a very, very high standard. We are rolling out, I mentioned sort of various areas, leadership, equipment, welfare. So we're rolling out some really good technology, thanks to previous generation, you know, of commissioners and others. So they're all getting body-worn video this year if they're on, you know, uniform patrol work. They love that. They're getting, people will be issued soon with mobile devices so that they don't have to keep coming back to the police station. I think they're going to love that. It's going to be a really good bit of kit. I've just made an announcement yesterday we may come to about Taser and my desire to protect the public and also the officers more, something I have been very focused on before I became Commissioner even. I was asking, what are we doing about that? At the softer end of things, if you look at our sort of occupational health response to the incidents we've had over the last several weeks, it has been excellent. I think people are feeling cared for and, you know, taken seriously. And then there's the issues I was discussing with Len about how we improve the leadership capability more generally, and in particular try to kind of listen to our officers more. But I'll take, you know, any reasonable opportunity to try to both listen and respond to what people think they need, and to try to give people a really positive working environment. So, you know, I want people to feel that they're really thriving, not just, you know, turning up and surviving, if you like. And again, members of the committee will have ideas about how we can do this, but we've got a whole series of things underway. I mentioned my issue around externally the you know, difference in confidence in between some of our communities, public communities, and their confidence in the police, and I want to reduce that. I'm also somebody who, those of you who know me well, has spent the last 20 years, probably more than that actually, very heavily engaged in how you make a workplace more inclusive. So diversity and inclusion is incredibly important to me also. I don't think the Met is full of problems in that respect, personally, but I think there's a lot more we can do to make sure that we get the best out of everybody and they do feel included and they can really thrive.
Can I also just mention as well, a group we often don't talk about when we talk about morale is our police staff. So if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, our police staff, when you talk about changes in the rest of the country where officer numbers fell and a whole range of things, our police staff, we lost about 4,500 posts. So you talk to people in the organisation who are on their third and fourth time of reapplying for your post, it does make you think differently about the organisation you're in. So a lot of the work we're doing as well is saying, you know, the total organisation has to work. And that's been a big challenge for people. When you're managing through this level of uncertainty around your financial envelope 2, 3, 5 years out, that's always going to put strain into the system.
Which is what I was going to pick up on, actually, because one of the things that struck me about this discussion is that I know we're probably coming on to budgets and finance. I hope we are coming on to budget and finance, but actually, yes, you can do a lot of transformation. You can do the supporting and the listening, and there's really good work that is happening and should happen in the Met. But if actually the context that the officers are working in and the police are working in is absolute pressure, and when we're talking about pressure, we're talking about diminishing resources. Craig touches on the police staff. That's where the cuts were taken over the last years, and get the £600 million coming out. There is massive pressure in the police at the moment. When I go out and talking to frontline officers, they are very, you know, when we talk about pressure, the demand on them and their ability to respond is constrained by the budgets and by the number of officers they have, and also constrained when we talk about problem solving. The police can problem solve and they can work as far as they can in problem solving, but to really solve a problem, you need all the other partners to get around the table as well. And if those other partners are under immense pressure as well, that puts extra pressure on the police as well. So we've really got to think about the context where the police are working in, and that is about resources and massive pressure. That does contribute to low morale. It does contribute to the problem solving not happening in the way it should happen. And we've really got to get onto that issue around what resources do the Met need and how do we ensure that they get the resources they need, whilst, yes, continuing to be more efficient and transforming the service for the public, because we do need a transformed and modern Metropolitan Police Service for the new demands that the years are going to bring us.
Well, thank you very much for those responses. I know one of my colleagues will pick up the finance issue later on, so it won't get missed.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy, particularly for that, and one couldn't disagree with it. I mean, one point I would make is the increasing trend over recent years of neighbourhood officers having to deal with issues with residents with, for example, mental health issues, with the pressures on local teams about issues that perhaps should have been dealt with or should be dealt with in partnership with other organisations that are then shunting that responsibility to the Met Police. I think that's an issue. And on a slightly lighter note, you made a point around neighbourhood teams parading and moving out to their neighbourhoods. One of the issues is the amount of time. It's an opportunity for me to plug something, basically. It's that the amount of time that the teams are taking to move from the place of parade to when they finally get out to their wards. And I think Len has brought that up recently. So they may have to meet at 8 o'clock in the morning somewhere, and I'll say New Addington for no particular reason, and then have to travel an hour on a bus to get to their ward. And this is replicated all over London. I believe that with some of the commanders actually are happy for them to meet and parade out in the boroughs, but one of the issues is around the body-worn video kit, that they have to go back to dock the kit at a central point. And that's a technology issue. So just for you, Craig, because I know you understand these things.
Thanks.
More than I do, certainly. Craig has been living and breathing these issues for some years.
Yeah,
if you could take that one.
I've been aware of that challenge. Some of it's about network capacity in some of our partner agencies, but it's certainly something we're looking at.
Yeah, because I think we finally got to a position where partners, LFB, local authorities, are happy for officers to go out there, but they haven't got the kit.
No, there's been some amazing goodwill from partners about how this can work better for London collectively.
And that helps morale, of course. That's my tenuous link to it. Right, fantastic. Next set of questions is tackling serious violence, and the Deputy Chair has a question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, before we start asking the questions that we had prepared, I want to ask some questions about the announcement yesterday on Taser deployment. Yeah. We'll ask about the reasons for it in a moment, but if you can just quickly outline for us what the increase is, the number of new officers, which officers in which teams, and I understand there's also been a change in the operational rules for how they can be deployed. If you can tell us what that is as well, that would be really good.
So we are going to train over the next 2 years an extra 1,800, roughly, a few more officers. They will almost entirely come from our emergency response teams. There are some more specialists, but that's small numbers. We are also changing the rules, as you said, so that in the past you would always see on an emergency response team 2 Taser trained officers together. Now potentially there'll be one person carrying a Taser, can be accompanied by someone who does not have Taser and is not fully Taser trained, although they'll be aware, or they'll be Taser aware as we call it. So that as well will increase the availability. And we are also saying that sergeants who have previously been trained, if it's appropriate, they can also book out a Taser and they will have that with them. So this means that as well as all our specialist officers in things like firearms, who all carry Taser as a less lethal option, we will be doing a considerable uplift amongst our emergency response officers. So it's not our dedicated ward officers, those working in the neighbourhood teams, as an example. It is those who are most likely to have to respond to a call or come across an event in which serious violence is being used. And it will, in effect, double the availability on a borough, double numbers on a borough at any one time of the day or night. We're doing this in parallel with a likely change in the actual device that we will have. I think I can say this now, can't I? So we are moving from the current Taser to a different Taser, because that has been licensed by the Home Office. It is an improved device with better data recording, and also if it doesn't fire properly or have the required effect in the first instance, it can be fired again. But essentially it's one that the Home Office now approve, and we would anticipate that over the coming years the old Taser will no longer be supported. So we're moving to the new Taser. That requires a lot of extra training, but we're going to do that over this 2-year period. I anticipate the new officers should all be trained within a year of when we start, and of course you'll be aware that by the end of this year they will all have body-worn video. So it will be it's already highly scrutinised and highly accountable. It will be even more so.
So just a couple of follow-ups on that. I believe the total number of officers with Tasers will be 6,400. You said they would primarily be in the response team.
The new ones, yeah.
The new ones. What proportion of people in response teams will therefore have Tasers?
Oh, no, I think I know that. I did know that yesterday. I'm so sorry. I think I will have to come back to you. I think I've got a number in my head, but I don't want to just say it. But at the moment, if you imagine, there are all these firearms officers, for example, standing outside Parliament, or the specialist firearms officers, the armed response vehicles. They all have Taser. There are a number of other specialists who already have Taser. But on any one borough, let's take Southwark, there will be 2 double-crewed cars. 2 people in 2 vehicles at any one time with Taser. Potentially more, but only if they're double-crewed. We're going to go to the position where anybody who is on duty, who is Taser trained and can be accompanied by another officer, they will have it. And it adds up to, in effect, a doubling at any one time of the numbers. But it still means that a large proportion of our response teams are not Taser trained, and not everybody will agree with that. This is the sort of decision that I think a commissioner has to make. This is my view of what is the right level to have to protect the public and the staff. I'm looking for it to continue to be our best decision makers, our fittest people, experienced officers who really want to be carrying this piece of equipment, which is an excellent piece of equipment, but it's a grave responsibility.
Will their operational guidelines be published? I've actually tried to find them today, and I'm not sure I have been able to.
I'm very sorry. I think they most certainly should be. I can't imagine
Okay.
why they're
As long as we
not.
can have a link sent to us, that would be great.
Yeah.
My own searching that's possible.
Yeah, I think so.
Um,
And colleagues here are welcome to come and look at the training, which I know some of you have done before. Yeah.
Will the operational guidelines for their use on children be changed?
I don't think they will be changed. They are very clear, and it's an important part of the training. And it is very demanding training. I haven't been through it, but I have witnessed the whole of it. And they are put through a number of scenarios, including, you know, where people may have mental health issues, or people may have health issues, and indeed with young people. Every use has to be justified. It has to be necessary. And it has to be a proportionate response to the degree of force or threat offered by the other party. The vast majority of times, as you very well know, I think 80-something% of the time that an officer draws a taser, it is not fired.
Yep.
So it is only fired really very rarely, actually, about 200 and something times in London last year. The vast majority of times, the sheer pointing of the weapon or the red dot, which is the next stage, just takes the heat out of the situation and allows people to be arrested safely. And, of course, it's generally very much safer in these sorts of situations than another option would be. At the most extreme, both members of the public who are victims and suspects, I'm utterly convinced their lives have been saved by the fact that we had a taser. But in terms of young people, you know, that they're very well aware of both the potential risk and also the community impact of using a taser in relation to a young person, and it is very rarely done, and it's a big part of the training.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. I mean, but there are, they are disproportionately used on younger age groups. There's a disproportional use on BAME Londoners as well that's been found in the past. So I'm wondering, and the Children's Rights Alliance too, they've made it clear that, you know, children do feel really quite frightened by tasers, even when they're not used against them. Just being threatened by them seems to have a strong effect on children who are already carrying knives because they feel a level of threat on the street. So are you going to do anything to mitigate the potential impact that would have in trust in the police?
We already have some quite extensive kind of engagement more generally, but engagement around Taser. And I do think we need
slightly adjusted arrangement.
We need to, and are, you know, across all our boroughs as we speak, we are kind of engaging with our local communities and talking to them about Taser. And we are also, you know, we do a lot of work in schools and elsewhere, and I do think we do need to you know, talk further with young people about Taser. I don't want young people to be frightened of their police officers, that's for sure, for any reason. You know, I do want people to understand just how restrained officers are in the use of Taser, and, you know, every single time it is used is looked at very carefully. And if somebody uses Taser inappropriately or disproportionately, you know, they will be investigated, they will be dealt with. It's taken very, very seriously, and I think I understand why people might be frightened of it, of course. You're going to the point, how do we explain and engage? I think the committee can help with this. You know, the Deputy Mayor and our other key kind of stakeholders can help us with this. We don't want young people to be frightened.
We'll be following up this with questions once it comes in. Just finally, in terms of why the justification you're giving for this, in the reports and the announcement, you've linked it partly to terrorism, but I believe these were already in train, these changes in response to knife crime. So can you outline sort of how you think a typical scenario might be where this would help with preventing knife crime?
So I actually didn't link it with terrorism, but it was in the reporting, if you like, because this was something that I felt strongly about before I started as Commissioner. My first management board that I attended was before I started, and I specifically asked it, back to Len's points really, to be about how are we supporting, protecting, equipping our officers, and in particular, where are we with Taser? And you will be aware, as we've just discussed, that knife crime had been increasing, violent crime had been increasing, and a survey by the Police Federation indicated that a number of officers felt that more officers should have Taser. I think, though, you know, this is primarily about protecting the public. We have more knife crime, we have more violent crime, and every day there are examples of Taser not being fired, but actually being able to stop somebody from being violent, stop something from getting worse, stop somebody from getting hurt. And that's what I wanted to achieve. And I felt, and you know, there's not a pure science here, I felt that the availability was insufficient. That's why I've increased it.
But Andrew, you'll come in on Taser.
I was listening to your reassurances, Commissioner, about this, but the Met's issued a press report quite this morning about officers who attended near Regent's Park Mosque and tasered somebody who was apparently armed with a shoe horn. Nobody else was hurt, and that does seem rather peculiar. I presume you don't want to particularly comment on it, you may not know the details, but it does seem to me, going back to the reassurances you're given, something you might want to be looking at.
I have heard of the incident. I haven't had a review of it. I don't know what the full circumstances were. Rest assured, every single one is looked at. I don't think we should jump to the conclusion that that was an inappropriate use. I don't think we know. It is not always that somebody is armed with a weapon when we use it. Far from it. But sometimes it is. And perhaps I should just say, back to Sean, I didn't say this was in response to terrorism. However, I have said, of course, there are some arrests we've made recently that are terrorist arrests where Taser has been used, in Parliament Square as an example, where it has been an extraordinarily powerful response, and who knows, in other circumstances, something terrible might have happened, either in terms of the person, the suspect coming to more harm, or actually members of the public injured. There are a whole variety of violent incidents in which Taser is entirely appropriate and is the best tactic to use. There are others where it is not.
If I can as well, you asked for some ideas of examples. This current series of the Met documentary, you see a few real examples of that, where people are using it to contain a situation in a completely different way without having to use excessive violence or have 8 people piling on top of someone, as you know it was in my sort of day. It just offers a completely different opportunity and approach at times in those highly violent situations that patrolling officers, particularly emergency response teams, are often the first on. And the other point around the policy changes, that's really important. All that's done is bring us in line with the national policy. So we were outside of national policy.
Yeah. I wasn't questioning necessarily the need to have more tasers and the rest of the policy you outlined, Commissioner. I was just concerned that you've given very clear reassurances. This incident, I accept we've only got the Met's press release about it, but it does seem, as nobody else was hurt in the incident, that something you might want to look into.
We will certainly be looking at it. As I say, I don't think I can comment any further.
No, and
what I can say is we've used Taser in this force since 2003. It's been heavily scrutinised. I believe we've used it safely. I believe we've used it to very good effect. And as Craig says, on occasions, the individual who is tasered would otherwise have had either a ASP, which is a very blunt instrument and is likely to kill people all too easily, or 8 burly police people jumping on top of them, which also has sometimes had disastrous outcomes for all concerned. So I would really invite you to come and look at the training, because it is extremely extensive, and the officers who use it are very, very, very careful and very restrained.
Yeah, I'm sure that members may wish to take that up. I mean, for the sake of balance of speaking, just for myself as opposed to the committee, I think these changes are appropriate in response to some very difficult challenges that violent crime, particularly, that Londoners are facing. That's speaking particularly for myself at the moment. Right, Sean, you got
yes, I mean, actually, my further questions are about prevention, and some of the answers that you gave to Assemblymember Duval earlier on, and particularly the Deputy Mayor, covered a lot of the ground that I wanted to ask about. When it comes to knife crime, though, I wanted to ask about any new initiatives that might be coming up within the knife crime strategy around prevention, and also if there are any new communications policies planned. I don't know if that's more of a police or a MOPAC.
We've been working really closely on this, very closely, but I think it's probably better for the Deputy Magistrate.
We're going to be publishing the knife crime strategy shortly, and I'm also coming to talk to you tomorrow, I think, in a sort of private closed session around the development of the knife crime strategy. We are looking at prevention, we are looking, as I've said before, intervention, and when we publish we will be able to give more details around what that looks like in terms of working with schools, working with communities and working with families, as well as continuing to work really closely with the Metropolitan Police.
Can I ask about communication policy specifically? Will there be a new communications policy, particularly to do with, we've talked before about how people are made fearful of knives. The reason people are carrying is because they don't feel safe. The Met are still releasing, and they've done it this week, pictures of huge knives which then appear in the newspapers and are very frightening pictures. Will there be a new policy for communications within this prevention strategy?
I think Craig might pick up the Metropolitan Police policy, but in terms of communications, I mean, we've done some really quite extensive consultation with communities, families, young people, and the sort of the stakeholders you'd expect around the criminal justice system and the voluntary sector. And there are, you know, the real message coming through is about communicating with young people about the dangers of knife crime and how you get that communication through. And we are looking at that, about what the best way of really getting those messages through, whether that's through social media or through some programs going into schools around what the problems are around carrying a knife, to try and tackle that very issue about. A lot of young people have said to us during the course of this consultation, we've said to say a lot, you know, they're carrying knives because they're fearful, and really trying to get that message across that to carry a knife does not make you safer. You know, you may feel it makes you safer, but it will actually put you in more danger.
And just to pick up on that, I was fortunate enough to be part of one of the consultation events here, and I applaud the work MOPAC colleagues have done on it, because it was an extensive event. Previous gang members through to a whole range of other agencies. And on the issue you raised, because I was very conscious, you've raised this with me a couple of times before, it's fair to say there were mixed views from all the consultees. So there was quite a strong message from some about showing police effectiveness and showing that action is taking place, because there is a bit of a belief that nothing's actually happening, that stop and search is all finished and actually we're not doing anything. So there was some quite, and I found that quite powerful. Similarly, and we discussed before, there is some stuff around some bespoke communications for young people, and what that could look like, the role of other advocates in that space rather than us, the strength of the police message. So I think, I mean, we're probably sort of pre-rehearsing some of the stuff you'll go through tomorrow, but I was impressed with the work that had gone into the strategy, the basis for it, and some of the work that is coming up in relation to it. So I think it'd be useful to see that. And just on a practical note, we are doing sector again this week in terms of the work around knife crime and that drive. So that's on again this week in terms of it, and that's the rolling commitment we've made in terms of that relentless energy and focus on it. But I mean, the consultation is extensive, as you'd expect, a range of views.
Okay, thank you.
Caroline,
Just picking up, one of the things that I was very supportive of, and the previous mayor did support funding for, was youth workers in A&E departments, so particularly the major trauma centres. But given that actually we've got a wide range of A&Es in London, will you be looking at potentially supporting that being rolled out further? Because actually at the other A&Es is where you might get someone who's got a relatively minor cut from a knife, but actually at that crucial point you can hopefully support them away from getting further involved.
Yes, we are. Just to be brief, yes, we are looking at that.
Fantastic, great, thank you.
Yes, if I may, first of all, if I just say, Commissioner, I absolutely welcome the increase in Taser. We must look after police officers and the public, and we talked earlier about morale. I think if the police officers feel they've got more to support them in safety issues. But question, please, to the Deputy Mayor. We've heard that the Commissioner, I listened to what you say avidly, believes in and knows that stop and search is a really good tool, which it obviously is. With the increase in crime, can you tell me whether you're supportive towards this stop and search? Because one minute the Mayor is saying it's a good thing, the next minute it seems to be mixed messages coming out of the Mayor's office. So can you confirm that if there is an increase in stop and search, as a reaction to what is obviously an increase in knife crime, that the Mayor's office would be supportive of that?
I don't think there's been any mixed messages coming out of the Mayor's office or from myself. Stop and search is a useful tactic for the police to deploy, especially around knife crime, and we support their intelligence-led use of it. And the Commission's been very clear that the officers should feel confident in their use of stop and search, and that's the position that we take as well, and we support the police to use stop and search in the communities to take knives off our streets.
So if it goes up, we're not going to hear any complaining from the Mayor's office?
We support the use of intelligence-led stop and search. There will be transparency and accountability of that, and we understand that. So, you know, I can't be clearer, we absolutely support that. It is a useful and important tactic that the police should use, and officers should feel confident in using that.
Good. Okay, so if it increases...
we expect it to, you know,
that's
the Commission,
good.
the Commissioner has been
positive.
clear about this as well. We expect there to be increases.
Yeah,
whilst violence is increasing and there is intelligence there to support the appropriate use of stop and search, you would expect there may be some increases in it.
Good. Well, then that's very good news. Thank you.
I think, in fairness, the debate we've had in this chamber is about the ineffectiveness of stop and search. The volumes against the percentage of effectiveness, there was a disparity. And I think that was recognised by the previous Commissioner. And I think one of the issues is the pendulum may have gone corrections too far that away, so there needs to be a re-enabling of the use, appropriate, targeted, information-led use of stop and search. And I think Londoners would probably understand that. Tony, did you want to...
Well, really just to expand on that, one of the first things you did, Commissioner, when you came in, you said that you wanted to bear down on knife crime and gun crime, and I was very struck by your robust approach to stop and search. And I do really want to explore a little bit more about what Assemblymember Hall has just said about the difference between what the Mayor's office might think on the efficacy of stop and search and you. I mean, I have a headline here from the Evening Standard, from the Mayor, I'll do everything in my power to cut stop and search. And really the first thing is a question I want to ask from you, Commissioner. Do you think that there is any possible merit in making more use of Section 60 in relation to stop and search?
It was Theresa May who said that.
In brief, yes. So I take the Chair's point that, and I pay tribute to my predecessor Bernard, because, well, in fact, let's just go very quickly back very much further. I completely understand that in the history of London and the history of London's police and their communities, stop search has been historically a difficult and contested issue. If we go back 20 and 30 years ago, even some of us will remember the so-called sus laws. Mm-hmm. This was a difficult issue, and there was a perception from some, and people who are, you know, still alive now, that it was used in a rather random fashion, if I can put it that way, and that caused resentment. Bernard, I pay tribute to, because he recognised that there was considerable concern around disproportionality of outcomes and low, your point, Chair, arrest rates. And during his commissionership, the arrest rate went up a lot, and disproportionality reduced, by which I mean that if you are a, let's say, young black man walking down the street, and you are stopped and searched, the same proportion of those young people, whether they're white or black, get arrested. I think that tells you something quite positive if you are concerned about disproportionality, about the way we conduct our activities. During that time period, the volume of stop search reduced, and you've touched on that, and secondly, the volume of Section 60 usage reduced very, very considerably, and as we know, the current Prime Minister and previous Home Secretary was very concerned about some of the issues, and there's a lot of focus on stop search, and some best practice guidelines were produced by policing, including in relation to Section 60, and I'm assuming that members are broadly aware of Section 60, but its use in London is now very rare indeed, or has been until the last few weeks. My view is that if I was, and some of you will have seen the Met documentary, if I was, for example, the senior person around in the Hyde Park scenario, or a number of the other scenarios that you have seen actually on that documentary programme, and I had seen disorder or violence take place on that scale, I would then want to have Section 60 as a possible tactic to use, if I can put it that way, power to enforce for a short period of time in a prescribed area, because from my professional judgment, and it's usually the duty officer, a role many of you will be familiar with, you know, the duty officer is an experienced person. They say, I know, I feel I know, I don't have specific intelligence that something is definitely going to happen next, but I think it may. And I believe that since the law says in those circumstances they should be able to have a Section 60 power imposed, we should support them doing that. And I don't think there should be a higher bar. I think if the professional judgment is that there may be serious violence, I don't expect it to be used a very great deal. I think there are times and places where it's entirely appropriate and will keep people safe. It needs to be short time periods, small areas, and very clear, obviously, accountable, justified, lawful, but I do support it in some circumstances. Yes.
Well, that's very encouraging. Did I hear you, by way of a sort of throwaway line, say that up until the past few weeks, when you were talking about the incidents of knife crime, are you telling us that since your coming and your change in attitude to stop and search, that you have been able to reduce knife crime and possession?
Oh, no. I'm not even saying, which some people might have interpreted, so it was a rather careless line, I'm not even saying that Section 60's usage has gone up hugely in the last few weeks. What I'm saying is I know what it was for the last financial year, and it was Section 60 usage was very low, and knife crime was going up. Knife crime, of course, like any other crime, fluctuates.
Of course.
It was very high in March. It is slightly lower at the moment. I don't describe that as a trend. We're working very, very hard. I want to be judged in the next sort of 3 months, 6 months, and a year. I am not saying that knife crime is now on the way back down, but we're working very hard to take it down. And I have made it clear to my officers that within the law, when they feel the need to use Section 60, they should. But it's a hugely powerful power, and it needs to be used carefully and with discretion.
Well, I've no doubt that the police would use it with discretion. So therefore, can I ask the Deputy Mayor, if you see a greater incidence, Deputy Mayor, of Section 60 being used, in prescribed places, in the limited way that the Commissioner has spelt out, is it something that is going to be supported by you and the Mayor?
I think Section 60 is like stop and search. It's about the appropriateness of its use and the transparency and accountability with that, and the engagement with the community as well. So yes, absolutely. If Section 60 is used in the appropriate manner, and as the Commissioner's set out around its lawfulness, and it isn't used on a long-term basis or across a too large a geographical area, yes, we will be supportive of that, because that's it. We support the police in using all the powers that they've got in an appropriate way to tackle knife crime, because this, the violence on our street is unacceptable. We have to protect our young people. We have to protect our communities. I've recently spoken to a borough commander who did put a Section 60 into a small area of the local community. I've also spoken to the local community about that, and they were very pleased and happy. They were content that that had been put in, because by putting that in, they found a number of knives, very large knives, but also through the process of the Section 60 going in, they had engaged with the community and told the community leaders why that was going in. So it was very transparent, accountable, and absolutely appropriate.
That sounds a kind of a post hoc thing. You can't consult the community before you're bringing in a Section 60, can you?
It's not about consulting before, it's about engaging with the community and making sure they understand why Section 60 is being put in place. And actually you can quite quickly talk to leaders of the community, because borough commanders, as we all know, we've had many discussions in this this committee about, they know their community leaders and they have that quick ability to talk to them, and I think that is important and should continue.
Well, I'm hugely encouraged by that. I was particularly struck at the statement you made right at the very beginning, Commissioner, about as a result of the events that there have been, about the huge, I can't recall precisely how you phrased it, expressions of support for policing. And my guess is that as far as Section 60 is concerned, that will be something which, again, I think that the sensibly used Section 60, that the public would want to encourage, and I would like to think that there's no equivocation, and the Mayor's office would in fact support this. Thank you, Chairman.
Have you got questions on gun crime at all, Tony? Okay, that's fine. I mean, there's a good debate around Section 60. I mean, partly to refer to Tony's comments, I mean, you can brief the community. I was subject to a briefing on a potential Section 60 in the north of one of my boroughs with the IAG, and it was positively responded to by those leaders. Okay, we're now moving on to the last section. Thank you, members and everyone, for the timings. We're doing very, very well, which is around a very important issue around challenges for policing in London, particularly with aspect around resourcing. And Andrew, you want to lead these questions?
Yes. Perhaps we'll start off by just working out exactly where we are on funding, because we've talked about the £400 million shortfall. Yes, I think it's today actually, the Home Office reported as saying the Metropolitan Police will not have to find cuts worth hundreds of millions of pounds over the next 3 years. The Home Office has announced following calls for the force's budget to be protected in the wake of 2 terror attacks. And the report later, this is the report in the Independent of a press release from the Home Office, and the report goes on to say that a spokesperson for the Home Office said the government is not reducing the Met's budget by £400 million. Police spending was protected in the 2015 spending review, and the Met has had a broadly flat cash budget since then, including precept in line with every other force in the country. So it seems to me that the £400 million cut still is there because of the pressures on the Met's budget from inflation and pensions and all the other things. So where are we?
If I start, as probably the least expert on this, my understanding is that the statement from the Home Office yesterday indicated that the police, or that together with other information, indicates that the police funding formula review may not happen. We, of course, did not know what the result of that review would be, but it's perfectly possible that it could have resulted in less funding for the Met. So that was one of our uncertainties. And if the funding formula review is taken away, that uncertainty goes.
Yeah, that was a known unknown.
Sorry?
That was one of the known unknowns.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not. Well, I was once a baby accountant, but I'm not an accountant, by the way. However, what that leaves us with is a Met which has already, as has been noted, taken £600 million out of its budget over the previous years, out of its spending over the previous years, not without some difficulty, which is, at this stage, planning still to be potentially a smaller Met. And in relation to the 400 million, as I think you say, that is our current prediction, not taking into account any changes in the capital city grants, the NIC so-called, which is another uncertainty. But if you forget that for a second, we believe we have £400 million of pressures and extra costs that Craig is supremely expert on, and you too perhaps, which will bear down on us in the next few years unless there is any further resourcing coming in. And we have obviously been talking with the government in the light of the terrorist attacks about, and the background context about what our resourcing might be in the future. But you're right on the 400 million.
So in fact, nothing's changed, and that's effectively fake news from the Home Office. I wouldn't expect you to come under that, Cressida, but Sophie might.
I think it's factual.
It's factual.
If the reports are correct, that they are dropping the funding formula review, we'd be pleased with that, because it takes away that uncertainty and also, frankly, a lot of work in lobbying and trying to make sure that the funding formula review didn't disadvantage London. So that's one thing. But as the Commissioner said, that was just one part of the issue for the Metropolitan Police, because we've got there's the funding formula review. The second bit is flat cash that the Home Secretary describes as protecting the police budget isn't a protection at all, because actually what the Metropolitan Police Service needs and its budget needs is real terms increases, because we've got real increases in demand, real increases in cost and real pressures, which means that we then get to the £400 million worth of savings in order to be able to deliver the service and protect London in the way that we need to. Then there's two other bits as well. There's the National International Capital Cities grant. The Met is seriously underfunded on that, despite the Home Office agreeing the amount of money that the Metropolitan Police spends because it's policing the capital city. It's £174 million underfunded on that grant. And then we have another separate bit. That's
based on the government's own numbers.
That is based on its own numbers.
Based on the Met's numbers, which is even higher.
And it's 62% underfunded, which the Home Secretary, when it wrote to the previous Commissioner when this was agreed, accepted that there was that underfunding. That was a political decision in order, because they weren't putting more money into the overall policing budget. And that's basically what needs to happen. We need to see real-term increases. And if we don't see real-term increases, it's going to be, we've talked about the pressures on the Met already around counter-terrorism, increases in violent crime. It's going to be really difficult to secure the safety of Londoners.
I'll come on to the Nick in a minute, but just to be absolutely clear, so when the Home Office says the Metropolitan Police will not have to find cuts worth hundreds of millions of pounds over the next 3 years, the Home Office is not telling the truth.
I think you were right in your language. It's not cuts. These are budget. We're having a debate about effectively, and the way I've used it internally with colleagues, it's like saying to someone, you take home £1,000 a month, and in 4 years' time, you'll still be taking home £1,000 a month. Will you feel as well off? No, you won't. Inflation's running at 2.9%. You've got pay pressures. You've got a whole range of other things. This is £400 million of pressures that are sitting there in the budget that are real and are based on a current set of assumptions. If those assumptions change, those pressures could get bigger or they could get lower. But, the pay one, can we keep pay at 1% for another 4 years? Pay puts about £25 million of pressure for every 1% you put in. If you can find no other way of doing it, that's 500 police officers. So every 1% on the pay bill could be 500 police officers out, unless there's new money to support it. Now, those are all choices we have to make as we build the budget and present options to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor.
Yeah. So we've got the £400 million cuts to come as things stand.
I don't.
We have that.
We've got a £400 million of pressure.
Yeah, well,
we have to take £400 million out of the Metropolitan Police budget.
Well,
now, the Home Secretary can still continue to say we've protected the Metropolitan Police budget. That isn't protection in my books, and I don't think it's a protection in your books, or in Londoners' books either, if you're taking that amount of money out of a budget.
Exactly. And could I just go onto the Nick briefly as well, because that's smaller sums but still significant. I understand from what Craig has told us before that it's always paid after the event. So we spend the money, then we try and get it back out the Home Office. Correct?
Yes. Yeah, and we've not had a review. So we're working on, as you say, a media release at the moment. The other bit, as the Deputy Mayor covered, that we need some of that clarity on, what is happening for the NIC for next year. We're 9 months away from a budget. Is it going to be the same? Is it bigger? Are we going to get the full amount? We don't know that yet.
And bearing in mind what's been going on in London, certainly in the current year, one could expect that the actual amount we're spending, which I think would be reasonably attributable to Nick, is going to be significantly more.
Yeah, and we touched on in the Budget Committee last week when we had some time around this, and I think the point that we've emphasised a number of times, it's really important when we see the response for London, we understand this is a system response, and just ring-fencing parts of it, whilst absolutely understand why people do that. I think I used the figure at the Budget Committee that for the events at Westminster Bridge, from our early analysis, for every pound we spent in the CT budget, we spent £2 in the wider Met budget. That's the sort of gearing. If you're going to have a system response, that's the sort of gearing you need.
Yeah. Okay, so assuming we've got the find the £400 million cuts, stroke, savings, stroke, not funded in the Met budget, plus whatever extra the NIC is, Commissioner, what are you going to do to bridge the gap?
We have been planning for a smaller Met. We have been planning in the longer run to be more productive and more efficient. We do think we can do that and must do that, as the Deputy Mayor has said. But in the light of the increasing demand, and in particular the extra demand brought upon us by the terrorist attacks, looking back, as you say, overtime and other spend, but looking forward, dealing with that threat and providing protection and security, I have to say it will be very difficult, which is why we have been talking with the government about, and not just me, but other police chiefs, and we're working closely with chiefs across the country. I do believe London is special. I do believe it's different. There is the capital city and the degree of threat and risk that sits in London. But we're talking with colleagues, and we are talking to the Home Office and to the government about the future, because it will be extremely difficult, even whilst becoming more efficient and taking more cost out, for us to provide security and reassurance to the public that we can provide the services that they reasonably think we should be providing with that budget in the future.
So what options are you looking at?
Well, we're certainly looking at how we, as I said, take demand out of the system. We are already had a large number of programmes underway, for example, around estates, which I think we will continue with, around using technology better, which we will continue with. We have a whole series of programmes within our sort of transformation portfolio. I do not think in the current climate they will be sufficiently transformative, if I can put it that way, and sufficiently money saving for us not to have some other, if we don't get any further money, it will be very difficult for us to provide some of the services we currently provide.
So what we're actually talking about is a reduction in police officer numbers. From what you're saying, if all these other options
Oh, I see.
Oh, yes.
don't bridge the gap, we're talking about cuts in police officers.
I think it's inevitable. I mean, you'll be aware that we have taken 600 million out, and in this force, unlike many others, we have largely protected the police officer numbers and taken the savings, terrible word, from other areas. That has involved enormous numbers of police staff losing their jobs.
In particular, and PCSOs in particular.
And PCSOs, of course. We've looked, if you like, in an awful lot of our cupboards. We've improved our contracts. We've taken excessive cost out left, right and middle. It is inevitable that without further assistance, our police officer numbers, in my view, will drop. I don't like, however, to talk about specific numbers as that's the right number, or that's what I want, or that's what I need, because I don't think that is helpful, because it is about choices at the time. But right now, we are undoubtedly facing a reduction in police officer numbers.
Well, thank you for that. And then you also talked about the estates.
Yep.
Presumably, from what you're saying, that means more police station closures.
Yes, it does. Yes, I don't. I am. How can I put it? I'm long in the tooth, and I am a sentimentalist. However, I don't actually see police station closures per se as necessarily a bad thing. Indeed, I think if we weren't facing the budget pressures we are, I would still say to provide a 21st century police service, I want, in fact, to have less even fewer expensive to run, inefficient buildings, and I want my officers more mobile. That's the way I want this police service to be. Of course, we will retain and must retain some buildings, both to operate from and for the public to come to, but our footfall in terms of members of the public wishing to attend a police station is getting less and less and less and less and less. and the vast majority of people want to speak to us on the phone now, increasingly online, and of course, you know, where we can face to face in their local area or where they're working. So, but short answer, we will be reducing the number of police stations. Yes. Fine. And we would be even if we weren't facing these budget cuts, in my view.
Okay, well, two issues come from that.
Deputy Mayor view as well.
One of the issues is the one that Tony flagged up about the time it takes for officers to get to where they're supposed to be patrolling from a central point. And if there are fewer central points where they're supposed to parade, then we have to look at other options. And I think one option might be looking at partner organisations using it. But that's one issue. Yeah. And the other issue is the various phone numbers. And I've had a lot of complaints, particularly for people in Camden, about the length of time it gets through to the non-emergency number. And in fact, I've put some mayor's questions down for tomorrow about that. Right. And I think that's something that if we are going to stop people being able to go to police stations to report crime or lost dog or whatever it happens to be, particularly if they're non-emergency numbers, then it has to be an efficient system. And the evidence I've been getting from quite a few people in Camden is that it's not.
Well, we'll go away and look at that. I take your point entirely in principle, though. Of course, whatever way in which we encourage people to contact us and in whatever way they want to contact us, it must be an effective and efficient system. You've heard, though, about the very large increase in demand and increase in calls. You know, right now, I would have to say, I actually do say to the wider public, we are a very busy police service for all the reasons you can completely see. We are still having a very large number of contacts that don't really need that call, and they really don't, and that is, you know, clogging up our systems and causing a lot of wasted effort. So we want to educate people more and more and more about how to contact us efficiently, how we get back to them quickly, and that will be more and more online, and more people of all generations and all communities want to do that more than we currently have. And we will also be trying to, if you like, switch off some of the less efficient and also some of the, try to deter some of the unnecessary calling.
So are we going to finally kill off the contact points idea? I mean, that was the fig leaf when we closed the police stations before, and it just simply haven't worked.
We're looking, I mean, you know, I mean, in terms of your sort of wider question about what are the options around getting the savings out because of the cuts in the police budget, we are looking at the whole of the police estate. We have to look at the whole of the police estate because we just have to get that money out. But so yes, we will be looking at you know, we are having to come out and we will be looking at these things. But the wider question is really around, you know, what is it that the Metropolitan budget needs? We have to be more efficient, we have to be more effective, and the Met needs to be more efficient and effective. But even with that transformation, without a change to the Metropolitan Police budget, we are talking about police officer numbers. Yeah. We're talking about reductions in officer numbers. And that does concern me, and it concerns the Mayor, because without the right to the sort of level and, you know, the level of the policing service that the London needs, the officers that London needs, we're going to find it very difficult to keep London safe, to tackle violent crime as well as counter-terrorism. And that the only way of doing that is, yes, no funding review, but it is getting back to real-term increases in the policing budget for the Met. And that's our bottom line. Otherwise, we're going to have to take some really difficult decisions, and we're worried about the safety of London. Well,
thank you for that, and I don't think anybody, certainly on this side of the chair, would disagree with what you've had to say. And inevitably, I mean, we are getting the end of the cuts that can be made without biting into police numbers, and I think the Commissioner's made that position very clear. I'm just exploring the bits and pieces that we've still got left before we get really into the bone. I'd I mentioned the question of contact points, which I think have been a complete waste of time. I think most people would agree they were a complete waste of time. They were the invention to try and cover up the last police station closure rounds. I was going to go on next to borough mergers and where we've got to with that, and when we're going to hear more news about that. Certainly the feeling I'm getting back, particularly from the Camden side, is it's not been entirely a success as far as people in Camden are concerned, and I'm going to talk about that without having to go into detail now. What system of evaluation is there going to be for the two, I forgot what they call, not pilot, Pathfinder mergers? First of all, what the system of evaluation of the Pathfinders? Because the feeling I've got back is it's all, the evaluation will be what we want it to be, rather than any hard evidence-based evaluation. And I am concerned that it will come up with a result that people want to see rather than an evidence-based result.
I've been out on patrol in Camden and Islington. I went out on night patrol with some response officers. I've also been to the Eastern, the newly formed East Basic Command Unit, and talked to officers around the work they're doing around vulnerability, looking at rape cases, child protection and domestic violence cases. And there have been issues in the implementation of the Pathfinders. There have been teething problems, and the Met are working through those issues. And I can absolutely tell you, and I hope you feel confident, that the evaluation is not going to be, we'll evaluate it and that we've got the answer we're expecting. It will be an evaluation based on data. It will be evaluation based on, in terms of response times, looking at making sure that, the fundamental sort of contract the Met has with the public around ensuring that in an emergency they are there to make sure that that happens. There will be a robust evaluation, and that is, we're looking at what the issues have been, how they can be worked through, and then there'll be decisions that will be taken once those issues have been worked through. And we're having those conversations as well with the chief executives and the leaders so that they understand where we are on this.
So you're giving me assurance that it is an evidence-based evaluation.
Yeah.
And will the evaluations be published?
The evaluations, I can't see why they wouldn't be published. Because you have to have some confidence. That's where it can be published. We should be as transparent and accountable as possible, because this is a restructure that everybody is very interested in.
Okay. And when we're rather new, if I might, just to say, they are pathfinders, and they were started probably in a way that people wouldn't think was ideal for a variety of reasons, and they are, there's some hard yards being done in those pathfinders. Undoubtedly, some of the challenges they have faced, if we go to the next stage with others, they won't face those because they are being used as pathfinders to iron out the really big challenges, which is not to downplay the challenges that the officers are feeling in parts of the pathfinders, because it's hard work. Yeah. But they are pathfinders.
Okay. Well, thanks for that.
One other thing I would also add is that one of the conversations that I've had with the officers that I've talked to, one of the key issues we've got to understand and drill down on are the problems and the pressures that the officers in those pathfinders are facing, are they because of the model, or is it because of the demand of the capacity that they have as a force, the Met has? And that's what we've really got to iron out, because actually at the same time as the pathfinders and absolutely working through the challenges, we are seeing an increase in crime. That isn't only for the pathfinders, it is across London. We are seeing an increase in demand. So there are issues that every bit of London is feeling, and then there are specific issues and challenges around that model.
Well, the two particular things I'd mention, first of all, is community engagement, which doesn't seem to have been as effective as it used to be. And certainly looking at the community engagement with music, where over recent incidents have had a far better response and information feedback from Barnet than I have from the combined borough, Camden Islington, which I would have expected probably something quite similar. And the other thing is on response. Now, obviously, I'll probably get the complaints when you don't respond rather than compliments when you do. But again, I think that's something that needs to be looked at. There's also been reports, Commissioner, that suggestions are that the police won't be doing the things that you've done in the past or doing things differently. Or would you like to comment on that?
Not very much. Only to say, I think that's obvious. That's how how we, we've always changed. We've always moved on. We've always, tried to keep up with the outside world. So, as an example, getting more and more things online. Most people will really like that. Other people will say, no, I absolutely don't want to do that. We cannot potentially do everything, of course, and we've talked about this, lots of demands, increasing, lots to think about, keeping London safe. There may be some things that we choose, decide and announce we are not actually going to provide that service to that level in that way that you have become used to. And I think in the face of the terrorist threat and with the other challenges we've got and with a new commissioner, people should not necessarily be surprised by that. But I don't actually have, right now, something that I'm saying, that's stopping.
Okay, so you haven't got a list of things. I mean, for example, it's been suggested that burglary may not be investigated if there's no obvious chance of catching somebody.
Well, I don't think we have said exactly that. What I said, and I'm afraid again maybe I put it slightly clumsily, but what I said was that I think in the future the breaking into a shed, as I understand it, will be classified as a burglary. Literally, breaking the lock on a shed will be an attempted burglary. In the past, we always sent a police officer to any burglary. In my view, where a shed lock has been broken and there really does appear to be absolutely no other information available, I am not going to guarantee, it is likely, that you will always get a police officer. I think the public will understand that kind of decision.
Well, yeah, I can understand that. What about where somebody's had their house broken into rather than their shed?
So I think we need to work through all these things. I think burglary is an incredibly disagreeable and sometimes hugely impactful crime. And we will need to look right across our crime types on a case-by-case basis. Vulnerable people who need our help will get it. Serious crime will be dealt with seriously. At the moment, I have no intention of not sending a police officer to a burglary of a house, but actually it might be that a forensics person is a better person to send. So I'm not either going to give a cast-iron guarantee on that. We need to look at how we provide our services in terms of what we think is, an effective way to cover a very, very broad waterfront, as we've discussed this morning, and within the resources that we can see we have.
So, just to wrap up this section of the question, the bottom line is, if we don't get more money, we're going to have fewer police officers in London.
Potentially, yes.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
I think we've now got to the end of that set of questions. Thank you, Andrew, for freestyling at the end and covering lots of really important subjects. But certainly it's pleasing that the government have withdrawn the review. But clearly, and Craig put it perfectly well, the flat cash of that 400 million, or in Craig's example, £1,000 paid for 4 years, is a great concern to this committee. We are on record, have written to the government, and it's a settled view of the committee, indeed this new committee, hopefully, that we will be lobbying on behalf of the service.
I think if the reports are correct that they have withdrawn the funding review, I think I would really welcome you writing again to say, that's one thing, but we have still got these issues around the budget, because it cannot be, spun that this has protected the Met Police budget, because it won't have.
I'll certainly be consulting the leads to pursue that.
And could I just add quite clearly, the world has changed in the last 12 weeks.
Yeah.
So when you last met, you were concerned about 400 million.
Yeah.
The world is now different.
Yeah.
Everybody knows it.
No, absolutely. Okay, and thank you again for the answers. A couple of brief pieces of work before we can leave, and again, thank you all for your discipline around times. So, can we please note the report and answers given by the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, questions asked by members. Item 10, can ask the committee to agree our work programme as set out in the report, and also note the remainder of our meeting dates, agree our work programme, and delegate authority to me to agree the annual report. Date of next meeting is Wednesday, 5th of July at 10 a.m. I have no further business. Lunch is still served at 12:30 for those who wish to attend it. Thank you very much.
GLA Chamber Sound.